This is the biggest what if in gaming history. It
Oh,
is
wow.
so enormous. What if Nintendo made the PlayStation? Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 101 of High Scores, High Stakes, the podcast that's not about journalism, but is asking all the big questions. I'm your host, as always, Mr. Luvva, and with me is my co host.
It's me, Cardinal Smith. And how on earth are you, Mr. Luvva?
I'm not gonna lie, I've been better, but I've been a hell of a lot
Oh,
worse as well. Let's just put it that way. I'm fine. I'm fine.
well, I mean, your feelings aside, episode 101. Incredible. We hit
Hey,
the century.
we hit the Dalmatian number, the only number that really counts.
Yeah.
So I
You,
have.
road to 150 has already begun.
It has, and I say we're gonna get there sooner rather than later as well, aren't we? It's just one of those things, isn't it? It's exciting. The recording for episode 100 I thought was really, really, really good and really fun. And I hope people liked episode 100 because I know I had a great time recording it on Twitch.
It was a great laugh. Um, sometimes it was annoying when your pick got wiped out by someone else. But it was a great time recording it, for sure.
Yeah, it was. And speaking of recording, Cardinal, this is not our first time recording. It is our 101st time recording, and it is also going to be the 101st time when I explain to the people listening what high scores, high stakes is. And it is, of course, three friends, three PlayStations competing against one another in a PlayStation competitive league. Every week we pick a new game, we play a new challenge. The winner of that challenge gets 3 points, second place gets 2 points, third place gets 1 point. That is when we are in season, but we are not in season right now, Cardinal. We are in our side quests, which means that we talk about all things PlayStation, all things gaming. Every week is like a brand new podcast straight to your device of choice. And speaking of choices, right now, dear listeners, you have a choice to make. Are you going to give us a 1 star review or a 5 star review on wherever you're listening to this podcast? Give us what you think we deserve. We would appreciate it. And it feeds the algorithm. If you've already given us a star review, but you haven't written a review, the algorithms love those even more. So please consider doing that. If you've done both of those things, share the podcast with a friend or family member who you think would enjoy this podcast. You can do that right now. My analytics are telling me 80% of you are listening to your phone. Just hit the share button. It's right there. Bottom left hand corner. Push it. Go. Okay, you're
Right,
done it.
right
Well
now?
done.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Okay.
Yeah, right now. Yeah. And if you want to find, if one hour of our content a week just isn't enough and you want more high scores, high stakes content, just go to highscoreshighstakes.com, and on the homepage you'll find links to everywhere you can find us on the internet. Whew, that is getting brief and I love it. But do you know what I love more than the housekeeping and social links? I love asking you, Cardinal, what are you playing?
Oh, there it is. Well, Mr. Lava, thanks for asking. Because this week I've been playing Civilization 7.
Again, you've played it twice now. What?
Oh, I forgot I mentioned it last time. Um, I've been playing a little. It is fine and it needs some updates, but it's good. Um, I mean, I say I've been playing that. I've also been playing Project Zomboid, which is another
Wow,
top-down zombie survival crafter set in the
that's a
90s.
blast from the past.
Yeah, going around watching VHS tapes and a wee bit of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth just for the crack. Still whittling through it nicely.
Have you still not finished that yet?
Oh, lordy, no. It's a big boy.
What game am I thinking of? I thought you said you were going to the final boss, but it spawned all these mini quests. Was that Final Fantasy 16?
That was 16. That was 16. I got to the point
Uh,
where, like, it told me, "You're 95% complete," and everything felt like,
uh,
"Here's the climax." And then but it turned out to be optional side quests, where it was just, "Hey, you wanna go chat to this character for a while in this field?" or
Yeah,
earn some XP over here. Yeah, I had to do them all because that's the
of
curse
course.
I bear. But it was great.
I mean,
It's amazing, epic. I still recommend Final Fantasy 16.
I will play it eventually, but just right now, mate, there's just
It
so many games coming out all the time now.
and all the people who complain, it's not a Final Fantasy. It's super linear. It's not open world at all.
Yeah,
Go travel, do side quests. It's just bam bam story. Unbelievable boss fights and scenes. But
awesome. I really loved the demo. I played the demo and I loved it, and I was like, "This is definitely a game I'm gonna buy and I'm gonna play." And then it came out. I don't know why I didn't buy it, but I didn't. And there's just this big conveyor belt now of games just constantly. Even if they're not new, just every store seems to have a sale on perpetually, and it's like, well, I've always wanted to play that game. I'm going to buy that, and I'm going to buy that, and then they'll put on some random game that I've no interest in playing. Like what I've been playing this week, Cardinal,
what
RoboCop
have you
Rogue
been
City.
playing?
RoboCop Rogue City. And do you want to know what? It was a game I saw come out, and I was like, I liked RoboCop when I was a kid. That's a great movie. It is a great movie. Um, but the game has like no interest. I don't want to play a shooter. And then PSN dropped it to £7.50, and I was like, okay, let's go. And you know what? It's great. It's great.
You just straight in. Heck,
I did.
tell me about it. Tell me about the game.
Abs- Absolutely no shame. The game is hard to describe. It's obviously a shooter, but it has like immersion sim sort of elements to it. So the story is really interesting. The story takes place between RoboCop 2 and RoboCop 3, which is funny because even the developers of this game want to pretend RoboCop 3 never happened. But basically, it's all about the struggle RoboCop has between his robotic parts and his human brain. And it's just a really good. I don't want to spoil it because I think it's £7.50. I think everyone should probably give it a go. Every game's worth £7.50, surely, but it is a shooter. So you basically solve crimes as RoboCop, which usually involves going to a place and shooting a load of dudes. But in between those, you have to build up a case, so you'll be dropped into these like little hub areas where you can go and help random people of Detroit and pick up clues and pick up enough evidence to allow Robocop's programming to allow him to enter premises. So I don't know how au fait you are with the Robocop lore, but basically he has got prime directives. There's things he's allowed to do, but there's an awful lot of things that he's not allowed to do. And the game uses that really smartly. So it's hub worlds. They're not very interactive. It does have NPCs and running around it, but if a game doesn't want you to not go into an area, like a room, then when you try to open that door, it'll come up, prime directive, warrant required to enter this building, things like that. It's very, very smart. It's clearly made by people who love Robocop, because it's so on point with those first two movies. It's just really smart. It's funny. It has a lot of like RPG light elements. I think I described it to Sherry as it's like Deus Ex Human Revolution light. So I know Deus Ex Human Revolution wasn't the most RPG element heavy action RPG out there. This strips it back even further and gives you like a bare bones RPG experience where you can build up Robocop's abilities. It's just really cool, man. It's just really good. It's a really good game. It's well written, some duff performances, and you can tell it's a double A game, but it's exactly what, if you like Robocop 1, Robocop 2, you'll absolutely get something from this. It's clearly made by people who love the films, and they've treated it properly, and it's a good, good, good use of the Robocop license. It's probably the best Robocop game ever made, including that ocean shooter from the late 80s, the previous title holder of the best Robocop game ever made.
I remember that on the in maybe a arcade, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was in the arcade. It was also on all the home computers. I played it on the Amstrad way back in the day. Like, that was a great game. It's just like one of those games that every 80s forward slash 90s kid played as Robocop because we all watched that movie way too young. But yeah, I've been playing Robocop Rogue City. I'm really enjoying it. I'm about
Loving it.
6 hours in. It's just really it's a fun game. It's double A, and it looks double A, and it has double A bugs and stuff like that. But it's really good fun, really, really, really good fun. And I've also been playing Until Dawn on Twitch.tv, where I've started a playthrough of that, where I am making none of the decisions, and I'm making Twitch chat make every decision in the game for me. So it's going as about as well as you can expect. I've decapitated a deer, and I have left my girlfriend on the ground while a monster chases through the woods. It's all fun. It's all fun. But I will be continuing that for the foreseeable because I think it's going to take some time to get it done because every decision seems, because of the delay in Twitch, it takes a few seconds for those decisions to come through to me and then for me to click it and then for the Twitch stream to see it. But it's good. It's good fun. That's what I'll be playing. Until Dawn and Robocop Rogue City. Two great games.
An absolute eclectic mix, and thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the night we've talked about the games we're playing, let's talk about what the topic of the show is going to be this week. And I thought it would be really good fun to go back through gaming's history and look at some of the decisions that companies have made and ask the question, what if they made another decision? So we're looking at gaming's great what ifs. And I think we should waste no more time, Cardinal, and we should get there now. Let's go. Okay, Cardinal. Gaming's great what ifs. I have two that I want to talk about. Two. And do you want to start with the small one or do you want to start with the biggest one of all? One of these is absolutely enormous. It is an enormous what if. Which one would you like to start with?
I think my media studies A level tells me we leave the big boy till last.
Exactly what I was
Keep him
thinking.
hooked.
So here comes my first what if. And my what if is, what if EA never reverse engineered the Sega Mega Drive? That is my what if, my first one. So, Cardell, I feel like I might have to explain this one to you.
For the sake of the viewers and myself, EA reversed engineered a Mega Drive.
They did. They were, back in the day before they were the world's most evil company 3 times running, they were actually full of really ingenious engineers and things like that. So basically, the story behind this one is way back when, after the North American video game crash that never happened anywhere else on the planet, Nintendo imposed a whole load of restrictions on what game publishers could do. One of the big things they imposed was a limit on how many games per year a publisher could release. So, Nintendo dominated the gaming scene from 84 to about 89. 1989, the Sega Mega Drive came out, and Sega just followed their lead and imposed a annual game limit on publishers. They also charged a hefty levy to cover the cost of cartridge manufacturing. So EA didn't like any of these two things. They had a lot of games, a lot of movie licenses they wanted to get out there. That 2 game or 3 game a year limit wasn't no good to them, nor did they want to pay for the cartridge that was going to go on. So Trip Hawkins, former CEO of EA, decided to approach Sega and ask for a development kit for the Mega Drive. They were like, brilliant, more games, let's go. He took that development kit, give it to his team of engineers, and was like, find out how these cartridges run on this thing and find out how we can make them ourselves for cheaper. So people who grew up in the Mega Drive era will remember those EA cartridges that looked completely different to the official Sega cartridges. They were taller, they had a yellow tab on the left hand side, and that is because EA manufactured them themselves so they didn't have to pay Sega the licensing fee for the cartridge manufacturer. They ensured that they got all the money for their game beyond the platform holders 20 or 30%, whatever it might have been back in the day. But yeah, it sounds like
What?
this is a weird thing. Why is Luvva talking about this? Why is Luvva talking about EA stealing money from Sega? Well, quite clearly this. Nintendo dominated the console space from 1984 to 1989. Once the Sega Mega Drive came out, it made some waves, especially in Japan. It was huge in Japan. Came over to the West, wasn't so big in America, wasn't so big in Europe until a little game got released from EA called John Madden Football, and it was huge. NHL game came out shortly after that. enormous. And EA and their backwards engineering of the Mega Drive turned Sega into the leading platform of the 16-bit generation. It meant that Sega overtook Nintendo for the first time in Nintendo's gaming history. They weren't the big player in the industry. It created this really competitive sort of scene, and it made sure that Nintendo did not dominate the space and just made the gaming environment much, much healthier, full of competition, and more importantly than that, full of really, really, really great games. People forget EA used to make great games, but they did, and they helped turn Sega into the biggest gaming publisher on the planet in 1993. And it all came around by reverse engineering Sega's hardware. So my question is, where would gaming be if Trip Hawkins never made that decision to backwards engineer the Sega Mega Drive? Cardinal. What do
Wow.
you think?
Okay, so we're in like a whole history reality here. Um,
We are in one of infinite possibilities.
so EA either just have to agree by the licensing, release 2 games a year. I mean, maybe one of those games is Madden, maybe maybe not by that stage. Um,
Yep.
then is that the industry standard? Nobody else does that, so we just carry on with this
Yeah.
set
Fear.
way of for however many years while cartridges still exist. Would it carry on in the discs?
Yeah, it's a funny one. So Nintendo created that rule because they believed that the gaming crash was caused by shovelware, just games coming out for the sake of games coming out. It all stems from that funny Atari story where they were making the ET game, and they printed more copies of ET the game than consoles they had sold in their lifetime. And Nintendo were like, "This is the big problem: is just too many low quality games because publishers are releasing games far too quick." So yeah, if EA agreed to, yeah, 3 games a year, then that means this Sega Mega Drive would have got Madden, NHL, and an other game, probably Road Rash. And then do they buy the FIFA license then? Because where's the point? There wouldn't be room in their schedule to release a FIFA game. And
No.
does that mean if they never reverse engineered the Sega Mega Drive, does that mean FIFA never happens?
Does Actua Soccer take over? Does Konami ever come in with their Pro Evo? I
Yeah.
fascinating. Do they become the evil organization they are today?
I don't know. Like,
Unlikely.
they printed money during the Mega Drive. Like, not. I know the Americans out there like to scoff at FIFA and our love of soccer. FIFA is one of the biggest gaming franchises out there. It sells exponentially more copies worldwide than Madden. It's enormous. I like that thought you had though as well of if they do EA agree to pay Sega the development cost of a cartridge, and then do they pay them a cut of every sale? And if they do, then does the 2, 3 game annual sort of restrictions, is that the industry standard? Does that mean like games companies can't release more than 3 games a year and stuff? I thought that you brought up. I want to explore that. Let's talk about that. Does that become the industry standard? And then what does that mean for games going forward?
I Well, when you talk about the FIFA franchise where it's yearly annual release,
Hmm.
maybe that still happens. Maybe that's just one publisher is this game, this franchise that they just release one of. Um, Real monopolies on different corners of the market surely can't
Yeah.
happen. Um, at the same time, I'm looking to today, and it takes like 5 years maybe to develop a triple
Yeah.
A
It
game.
does. Yeah.
But I think back to the night, even the late '90s. You've got Half Life, and then various DLCs released as independent games, straight after, straight after, straight after. Um, in the
Even
early '80s, there was you talked about like almost like bundleware, like
Shovel?
games shovelware, but there was like maybe 50 games
Yeah.
shoveled together, right? Does
Yeah.
that count? Can you get around it by doing that by just having
Compilation discs?
like compilation discs or cartridges or something?
But e but even at that, I mean, like, I know compilation discs were massive in the sort of 8-bit, 16-bit generations because I had a load of Mega games. You remember Mega games? Yeah, like Golden Axe and Italia 90 and Alien Storm all in one cartridge, maybe. But does that count? Because they always repackaged older games for value. Like if you put in like I don't know Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 into one triple CD pack on the PlayStation for argument's sake, does that count as one game, or does that count as that you can't release another game this year in our system? Like, it's grey and it's
Yeah,
quite a scary thought. I mean, nowadays it wouldn't make any difference because you said, when's the last time Naughty Dog released an actual new game? 5 years ago with The Last of Us Part 2 was their last actual game release. It takes so long now to make games, it probably would make a difference. The industry standard has shifted completely from a game a month from a publisher to a game a decade effectively is what we're looking at. It's become unsustainable, but a part of me is asking then if it's become unsustainable because of the pressures of developing these games, was Nintendo's idea of 2 or 3 games annually, is that actually accidentally build in sort of sustainability in gaming that we've lost?
I think about it. If you can only do that, and that's say the industry standard even today, are you losing value by not having those iterations that you could be releasing? Oh,
Yeah, and even
I,
a big question that would be relevant for today is me and you make our own game development studio and we release a game on the Sony PlayStation and it's like the division. So we'll call it the edition. So
nice.
we release the edition in February 2026. And then in June 2026, we release expansion pack. Does that expansion pack count as our second game? Or is DLC and add-on does that count? Where does it stop?
It's another gray area. Yeah,
Where does it
and
stop?
then game gets released in alpha or beta. Um, does a update like say, oh, version 0.9 release? Here you go. Is that a new version? Is this a new game? Is this a do you just launch a game out early and then iteratively release bits of it, more content of it, expanded extra area
Yeah.
of the map in the edition, catch it in summer 2026? You know,
It's gonna be incredible. It's
yeah.
an incredible experience, games as a service. Moving away from, like, the game restriction thing because that's what they wanted to get around. So let's also talk about the games industry as a whole. So if, let's say, EA decide, "No, we're not gonna reverse engineer, we'll just sign the contract and we'll be happy enough with the restrictions Sega have placed on us, and we'll pay them whatever they want." Does that turn Sega into the dominant console maker in the early 90s, or does it just allow Nintendo to push along? I mean, a part of me is thinking EA would be foolish not to sign it because it means they can release their games on 2 different consoles. But at the same time, Sega were fairly new in the home console market. They were always big in the arcades, but they were relatively new. They had the Sega 1000 and then the Sega Master System, then the Sega Mega Drive. Up until the Mega Drive, they didn't really have like a huge success. Um, so would EA just go, "Do you want to know what? Let's not sign it. We'll just release our games on Nintendo," and then Nintendo just continues their dominance until 1995 in our timeline. Who knows when? Does it just make Nintendo this enormous electronic video game company that no one can compete with? And does it mean that the gaming scene today is just Nintendo Switch or nothing?
I see, and I think I agree where you're going with this. So essentially, if you're EA at that stage and you're not going to reverse engineer it, you have your your option. Okay, you've got your Nintendo, but you've seen. Atari, Commodore, various consoles come and go. And what's different about Sega? Really, that okay, it's going to be expensive for us to launch on this. Is there any real benefit? Nintendo could just carry on growing, spread out throughout
Yeah,
the world without any obvious rival. Maybe Sonic doesn't happen. Maybe
yeah,
various huge franchises never occur that we pinned association with Sega because Sega's just never has that boom.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you think back. I think Nintendo, when the Mega Drive released, I think Nintendo held like a 95% market share in the video game space, the
Man,
video console space, which is crazy. And, they seen off. There was hundreds of home consoles, like literally hundreds in the late 70s, early 80s, that all just came out for 6 months and then disappeared. And Nintendo was the last one, the only one standing in 1984. So yeah, does Sega, if they can't get like publishers like EA, if they go, well, can we compete in the home market with this crowd? They might just go, no, I don't think it's worth it. They tried the Master System, didn't work. They tried the Sega 1000, I think it was called, the SG 1000, and it didn't work either. It didn't sell. And they probably just cut their losses and go, on the what? It's probably not worth it. As you say, Sonic never happens. Shinobi never happens. There's a whole load of games that will just be lost to the ether. Fantasy Star never happens. It's just loads and loads. And then Sega just don't bother, and Sega disappear off the gaming landscape by 1990, 91. It's it's an incredible story. It's a strange wee story. Just one company deciding to break the law. I mean,
bend the
it's against
rules.
the law. It's
Yeah,
against the law what Trip Hawkins did, by taking another console manufacturer's hardware and then reverse engineering it, breaking the BIOS and all that sort of stuff, and going like, let's machine our own cartridges, and we know how this works. We know what we need to do to get in here. Let's just do it, and let's just send them the game that we want them
it's
to
that
press for. It's
that
crazy.
intellectual property has just been
Eh, it's smashed,
commandeered.
and I think it's really brave of Sega to go, well, it's happened. Let's just run with it and let's see how it goes. And it paid off hugely for both companies. It did make EA the largest video game publisher on the planet, and it did turn Sega for a very short while the biggest video game manufacturer on the planet. It's really impressive.
If Nintendo stays on, say Nintendo's still
Yeah,
95% market share, okay, and say the rule is publishers only release 2 games a year,
yeah.
does that start to, with the increase of technology, home PCs, um, do, do people lean more into developing their own games at home, or is there a sort of more at home kits for games that you might create yourself because there's just less. There's just no market. There's the releases. They're huge. They're there. But if you want to customize something yourself or do something yourself,
The bedroom coder scene.
that never.
That's a good
Yeah,
question. That's a good question. Bedroom coders. That's do they stick around? I mean, I think to a point. I think when did the bedroom coder scene really stop? Around this Sony PlayStation?
easily. Yeah.
Really? I
What need
mean,
would you have
even
to beyond that?
even at that, even just as I said that, I was thinking no, because bedroom coders was still a thing in the PlayStation era. Because do you remember the Net Yaroze console? It was a PlayStation development kit. It was a black PlayStation. You can make your own games.
Oh,
And you used to get like all these like homemade games on demo discs, the official PlayStation magazine and stuff like that. So bedroom coders still exist then, but it comes a point when bedroom coders get sort of costed out of it, probably around the HD era. So do you have bedroom coders until 2005, 2006 with the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3? Is that when that stops? Would it stop? Is it possible? I mean, PC gaming bedroom coders never stopped. I mean, you think the Stanley Parable that we did Game of the Month on a few weeks back was made by three blokes.
well,
Originally
that's it.
one
That's it. When
bloke.
you start talking about indie gaming at this stage, and while that's huge, that's a big thing nowadays. Is it the main alternative in general just
Yeah.
to Nintendo?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, you think of some of those independent developers who've made a game by themselves. The Mike Biffle made Thomas Was Alone by himself. Jonathan Blow made Braid by himself. There's loads of examples out there of people, one or two people just getting together and making a game that slaps, to be truthful, and it just takes off. You know, you think of Pal World. Pal World was made by a team of 24, I think, and it was the biggest game of 2024. It was enormous. And that happens consistently. Does it create a market where it's Nintendo by themselves versus literally the world? And if Nintendo, if EA never did this, Sega never became as big as they were and as competitive as they were, and Nintendo just steamroll them, does it mean,
What what
does
what market is there for others?
Sony
Yeah.
does Sony come into the market? Does Microsoft come into the market then? You know, the knock-on effect is huge. Is it basically Nintendo versus PC gaming? And would PC gaming have accelerated as fast as it did if Nintendo were the only competition? Would arcades still exist?
Find
There's
out
so many questions.
find out in the alternative reality podcast Low Scores, Low Stakes
I
coming
mean,
out
there's
last week.
so many questions coming from if EA never broke the law by
Yeah.
backwards engineering the Sega Mega Drive, the whole landscape of gaming could change completely, and it would be completely unrecognizable, which is a lovely little segue into my next what if. But we'll take a wee break here. This is the big one, the biggest what if, in my opinion, in gaming history. It
Oh,
is
wow.
so enormous, and I've kind of alluded to it there in the last segment. But let's ask the question because it's on everyone's lips. Everyone's down to know what you think, and everyone's down to know what I think about this. But my what if, the biggest what if in gaming history, is what if Nintendo made the PlayStation? It's
So
huge.
I think there's some repercussions, but if you want to give a bit of the context, okay,
Yes.
because it was almost a reality.
So it was so close to being reality. It was so close to being reality. So basically the story goes as this. Nintendo were being pushed so hard by Sega, and when Sega dropped the Mega CD, the Sega CD to our American cousins, um, Nintendo did kind of panic a little bit because back in 1993, CD-ROM gaming was everywhere. Tomorrow's world, we're calling it. It's the biggest revolution in gaming. It will change our world, and it did. And Nintendo realized that they were miles behind Sega. So they started putting the feelers out to other large Japanese electronics manufacturers. And who was the biggest electronics manufacturer in Japan? Sony. So Nintendo and Sony got together and they discussed the possibility of a Super Nintendo add-on, CD based, and they wanted to call it. Well, they didn't have a name for it. It eventually became called the PlayStation. So Sony at CES 92, 93 announced that they had a partnership with Nintendo and that they were making a CD based gaming system with them. And it went the whole development went through. There was SNES development kit sent to Sony. Sony had sent them prototypes, etc., 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 etc. They were just about to begin manufacture, as far as I'm aware, when Sony sent Nintendo their final contract for the partnership. And apparently, Nintendo were absolutely livid with them, and that's because Sony were going to be making more money out of the PlayStation than Nintendo were. Now, why? Because Sony had a vested interest in the success of the CD format because, of course, they were one of the major shareholders in CD technology. And it meant that Sony were licensing Nintendo CDs plus the CD drives, plus the CD lasers, plus everything. So Nintendo saw this contract and they were like, I don't think so. I don't think so. And they did something that Japanese companies just don't do. They went behind their partner's back and stuck a big iron knife in the back. And Nintendo publicly, without informing Sony that they were declining the contract, publicly announced that they were working in partnership with Philips on a CD based console. Philips were Sony's biggest competitors. Like they were the second biggest electronics manufacturer in Japan. They were huge. There was a massive feud between the two of them, but from the early 80s with like the Walkman and all this here sort of business, everything Sony did, Philips would do a knockoff of, and it really annoyed them because there's no honor in that business model. And when Nintendo publicly announced we are working with Philips on a CD based hardware, apparently the CEO of Sony was absolutely livid. He called in the PlayStation team and he was like, "We're going to get these guys. We are going to beat these guys at their own game. Go make a PlayStation." And the rest is history. They did make the PlayStation, and at the time of release, it was the most successful games console ever released. It sold over 102 million units. It absolutely obliterated Nintendo. It obliterated Sega. It obliterated everybody. And you're talking factors of five and sixes. You know, they outsold the Nintendo 64 by 6 or 7 times. It's just, it was an insanely popular console. And Sony did it all out of spite because they felt betrayed by Nintendo. But I just wonder, does any of that happen if Nintendo just went, yeah, okay, it's your technology. We'll pay you a premium on this thing. What happens if Nintendo went, yeah, well, let's make a PlayStation, let's go.
Okay, and there, folks, is your what if, and that is absolutely gigantic, as you said and alluded to. Where do you even start?
I think we have to start with Nintendo's biggest rival, Sega. I think if Nintendo makes the PlayStation and it's an add-on for the Super Nintendo, I think in 2025 Sega is still the second biggest console manufacturer on the planet. That's what I think. First and foremost, let's start with Sega. I don't think Sega goes out of business if Sony didn't absolutely annihilate them. To be honest,
True, true. Okay, yeah, yeah. That's one aspect I didn't think of. So Sega are still a Dreamcast is there as an alternative, and
100%,
um,
100%. You just think of if you think of Sony and if Sony, Nintendo, Sega, Nintendo had their own real niche. You know, Nintendo were always much more family friendly than Sega.
yeah,
Um, and they didn't really like violence. If you think about Mortal Kombat and the Super Nintendo had the blood removed, there's a lot of this stuff. So Nintendo and Sega were different enough that they could have coexisted with one another and just pushed each other on to bigger and better things. When Sony enters the market, I think Sony are much closer to Sega than what people give them credit for. You know, Sega had the mature gaming market cornered, and then Sony came in, and then they cornered that mature market, and they got teenagers, late teens, early, young adults into gaming, and Sony more than Nintendo squeezed Sega out of gaming. They took their market from them
yeah.
brutally and swiftly. And I think if it was the Nintendo PlayStation, I think Sega's fine. I think they have their own little niche in the market. They wouldn't be, squeezed out of the market as hard as they were. You know, they saw off a load of competitors. They saw off the Atari, they saw off the 3DO, the CDI, all that good stuff. They saw all those companies off, outlasted them, outsold them, outsmarted Nintendo. Sega, for all their faults, were really, really interested in pushing technology forward. You know, they could be in this timeline where it's the Nintendo PlayStation. I think Sega could be Xbox, just constantly wanting bigger and better games and bigger and better things and better, faster hardware. I don't think they get squeezed out of the gaming market if it was the Nintendo PlayStation. I just don't. So I think that's the first big thing that changes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, imagine the Terminator games you'd have today on those Sega
Imagine.
console instead of Halo.
Imagine.
Oh, the RoboCop games. Wind it back.
Maybe with why not put Halo on it? Why not put Halo on the Sega Dreamcast 5? You know what I mean? Um, but there's so much more to this. I did mention the CDI there. um, Nintendo, as part of their deal with Philips, allowed Philips to work with their games, and that led to, of course, the CDI Mario game and the CDI Zelda, and also led to the Super Mario Brothers 1 movie from, like,
Oh
1993.
my goodness.
Like, all those 3 things were massive failures and super low quality, but it also made Nintendo really frightened of allowing people to work on their franchises, and that's why there were no movies from Nintendo, even though they have all this IP in the world. You know, there was a Mario Brothers in 1993, and there was nothing until like 2023. And I wonder if the Sony PlayStation happens, they don't make that deal with Philips. The Philips CDI games never happens. Do they become
Yeah.
multimedia? Do they become like Disney with like all these movies? Do they allow other companies to come in and work on their games and all this sort of business? Are they less insular as a result of success? Because it was the fear of, oh my days, this is going to damage our brand. And it was all because of Philips, all because of that thing with the PlayStation. It-
Are we traveling to Nintendo World? Somewhere
I mean,
in over
if
in
they
London or
want to send us
something?
tickets, if they want to send us tickets, I'd happily go to Nintendo. So another thing to consider as well, we have Sega, a strong Sega, because Nintendo PlayStation was a success, but not huge. Um, Microsoft. Let's talk about Microsoft for a second. I've talked
What are
about the
they
Xbox
up
a
to?
couple of occasions. So Microsoft in 1999 saw the success of the Sony PlayStation and they got really worried. So they were like, we have to do something to stop Sony becoming the dominant force in home computing. And they did two things. The first thing is they start developing their own console, and the second thing they did was they started partnering with other console manufacturers, specifically Sega. So you might remember the Sega Dreamcast was powered by Windows CE, which was an operating system just to allow
Yeah.
developers to port games from and to PC easily enough from the Dreamcast to kind of make like a unified operating system. Well, the Dreamcast failed, and once that happened in 2000, they were like, okay, we need to do something. So they ramped up the production of the Xbox in order to create a direct competitor to Sony in order to protect their home computing business. So if the Sony PlayStation never happened, but the Nintendo PlayStation did, does Microsoft feel the need to make Xbox? I don't think so.
I don't think
I,
so.
I don't see why. I don't see why they would. If they wanted to get into the gaming space, they could partner with Sega. I think that they should have partnered with Sega way back when the Dreamcast folded. I think that was the time to buy Sega, and they should have bought Sega because I think if they bought Sega, they'd become the biggest console manufacturer on the planet by miles. I think both
That's
of them have a
another
lot to
question.
give. It
That's
is.
another one.
Maybe
What if
for a part
Microsoft
2. Maybe for a part
Microsoft
2.
buys Sega after the Dreamcast?
But I think if the Sony PlayStation never happens and it was the Nintendo PlayStation, I don't think
Yeah.
Microsoft bother because why would they? There's no major threat unless Nintendo gets so big that they have to create a competitor to Nintendo. But then if they do that, is the Xbox family friendly?
I don't see them really converging in the same markets. Okay, if Sega exists and Sega has that mature audience, as you say, you know, Nintendo's got the family friendly stuff down. It's got the new theme
Yep.
parks all across the world now. Um,
Huge.
They're huge. There's Mario movies every other. Chris Pratt has played Mario for 15 years.
He's voiced out. He's voiced out at this stage of the game. He's no nothing left to give. He's just a
Think
husk of a
think
voice.
think of the Zelda quadrilogy movies that
They're the third one was
you
my favorite.
that you haven't even seen yet. You know the stuff. Has there been a new Netflix Zelda series stuff like that? What the heck? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, Mario Kart sponsoring Formula One. It used to be Sonic and Sega things. Mm. Okay. What what else changes? Microsoft own PC. Okay.
Microsoft own PC. Microsoft probably never gets into the games industry. I think if they do, I think trying to compete with Sega is the wrong thing to do
I
because
think I
Microsoft
think
Microsoft are dominant in the
yeah.
PC space, and I think if they were going to get into the gaming space in lieu, because there's no Sony, the mature gaming market is significantly smaller. So why would you fight over the small side of pie when you can have the big slice? So I think if Microsoft do start worrying about Nintendo because Sony never happened, then they would have to, surely, they would have to target the bigger section of the market for it to be worth their while, right?
I
So they
agree.
would, an Xbox with Blinks the Time Sweeper as their main mascot and it sells hundreds of millions of copies every few years. Like, seriously?
I
I mean,
And
it's
at the same time,
incredible.
from Microsoft's point of view, their main rival in their market space is Macintosh, right?
Yeah.
Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs, and so forth. They are trying to corner and get their own piece of that Microsoft market. Maybe Microsoft fully focus on that and driving them out. You never own an
Yep.
iPhone. You're sitting on your
Oh,
Sega console in 2025 with your Microsoft MS phone.
incredible scenes. Microsoft had a phone that was incredible. It was the best operating system I've ever used on a phone. I can't wait to get my Microsoft M Phone 17 Max Pro Deluxe. It's gonna be incredible.
Exactly. Exactly. It runs Excel in milliseconds, you know?
But yeah, the Sega, the Sony PlayStation Nintendo thing is just it could have changed the gaming the gaming world. I mean, there's nothing I can think of. It's even certain things like publishers who have went under because they've released too many games on one console of low quality. If Nintendo, if EA never did that, do they still exist? Do Midway still exist? There's so many questions that Nintendo decision. I would love to know the exact reason and who at Nintendo went, we're not doing this. And I would love to know how they feel about that today. Because that is an enormous blunder on their part to partner with Philips. Like the console never came out. There was never a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo because Philips just didn't have the nous or the capabilities to do it. Only Sony did in Japan, maybe Toshiba, but only Sony did. I mean, Philips made their name with the CDI, which was a licensed console. Like they didn't develop it. They just made shells for it. That was it. It was a strange decision, and it was a weird decision, and it is the most anti-Japanese business practice I've ever heard. And Nintendo is the last company on earth that I would expect that from today. I'm presuming back in the early 80s, the late 80s, early 90s, they were a completely different company because they were the big dogs. They were running they were running the industry, literally running the industry, and they probably thought we're we're the big man. We can do whatever we want. Sony, what are Sony gonna do? And little did they know Ken Kutaragi and Yoshida was gonna absolutely annihilate them with their little system that could. But yeah, I mean, there's so many more questions. If anyone else has any more scenarios they think plays out because of, Nintendo making the PlayStation, if you think of any more scenarios that we haven't thought of, let us know in the comments below. That'd be really interesting. But anything to add, Cardinal, or shall we get to the wrap up section, mate?
No, I want to hear other big theories now and alternative timelines. So
Ah, that's a great shout. Yeah, if you have your own like what ifs, gaming what ifs, tell us them in the comments as well, or shout them out at us on Twitter as well. Yeah, let's get a conversation. This because there's so many more. There's so much more. What if Xbox bought Sega? Huge news. But in lieu of these replies coming right now, I think we should get to the wrap up section, Cardinal. Let's go. And that is it, Cardinal. Another episode all wrapped up. Our
yeah.
most philosophical of episodes, I think, ever. Except maybe the Stanley Parable episode, which was hugely philosophical, and there was a lot of existential crises going on between me and Tomahawk in that episode. So there
Love it.
was, what am I? What's a game? but yeah, um, share your thoughts in the comments, guys. We really do want to hear your what if questions and your what if sort of scenarios from the questions that we have asked tonight. Once you've done those little comments, though, you know what I'm gonna say here. Once you've written out your comment of your question or your scenario, um, what I want you to do is rate this podcast 1 star to five, and wherever you're listening to it. If you want to write us a review, that would be amazing. If you want to share this podcast with a friend or family member who you think might enjoy it, even better. And if you want to find us anywhere on the internet so you can tell us your scenarios or your questions, high scores, highstakes.com. Top of the homepage is all the links to everywhere you can find us all over the internet. We are everywhere, constantly making content. If 1 hour is not enough, highstakes.com is the place where you get your fill plus more. It is incredible and it's free. Free content. Can you believe we don't charge money for this stuff? Incredible scenes. But that's the episode wrapped. That's the housekeeping done for the second time about this episode. And I don't think I've missed anything. I don't think there's anything left for me to say. Except,
Well, hang on.
oh,
What if Japanese companies never left the arcade or gacha machines and just never went into the home console world?
oh,
What would the world of home gaming look like?
with lots
Sorry,
more arcade.
wrap up.
Perfect. Arcade perfect would still be a review term. I miss those days. But yes, we have nothing more to say except I'll be Mr. Luvva. This has been High Scores, High Stakes. Thanks for watching. See you on Monday. Love y'all. Bye.